You're listening to Sarah Hagan Backstage, with interviews and insights from years inside the music industry. Join Sarah as she talks with masters of their crafts, finding out what makes them tick, both inside and outside of the music business.
Welcome to Sarah Hagan Backstage. My guest today, Stan Bicknell, was one of the first of the online drumming generation, but his music career is incredibly diverse, with many bands, genres, recordings, and students to his credit. We are going to talk today about all of these things and his incredibly disciplined daily routine, including his personal mindset and how he stays so positive. So come along with me as I catch up with Stan Bicknell. Stan, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, how you going, Sarah?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. It's nice to finally chat. I was just saying to you before, like we've spent, back in the Zildjian days, so much time talking over email. And it's nice to finally get on a call and have a yarn,
It is so nice. It's so nice. It's always been challenging because of the time difference, right? So
I know.
Right now
we live on the bottom of the world.
Yeah. And it's, trying to figure out the timing for this recording. We were like, what time is it where you are? What time is it here? and where are you, right? So Right now you're in New Zealand.
Yes.
And there is such an interesting story that I just have to talk about because you moved there during COVID.
Yeah. Me and my wife and my daughter made the move 2 years ago. And actually, 2 years this month next month I moved back. I got back a couple of weeks prior to the family to set up the house and just get things sorted. And we actually had a cat that we had to send over on the plane that actually separated us from doing the flight together. Because we had to do quarantine. Like when we got to, I had to spend 2 weeks in a hotel on arrival on my own. And then once I got out, my wife flew the cat over and I picked up the cat. And then they flew over and did their quarantine.
Oh my goodness. Well, I remember following along with you when you were going through that quarantine, and it was such a process because there was like a pretty serious lockdown as far as like who's allowed in and who's allowed out and how that all works. And I remember you were in this hotel, right? And you had to like stay in your room. It was almost like a prison sentence kind of thing.
It essentially was set up the way a prison's set up. And I don't want to refer it to that because, they made their reasons. They have their reasons as to why they set it up that way. But in terms of like, you were allowed out of the room twice a day for I don't even know, to be honest. And the reason why is because I didn't actually leave the room because a lot of people were getting COVID, mingling with other people when they went out for their 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And so I didn't want to run the risk of that because I had too many things to do once I finally got out. I didn't want to be locked down again. So I just stayed in the room for 14 days and I set up a routine, as you can imagine. Like I had things that I did every day. I like YouTubed hotel room workouts, and I found a couple of things that sort of fit with what I wanted to do. But it's funny, like even doing workouts, and like I did 2 workouts a day most days and whatnot. With the lack of energy being used in that small space, my sleeping over the 2 weeks deteriorated pretty much to the point that I've never really experienced before. Like by the last couple of days, I couldn't stay asleep longer than like an hour or two. It was so bizarre because you just can't really burn that much energy when you're sitting in a room.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And your sense of like space and time and all of that was probably just really thrown off.
It was, and I was like pacing, like I was trying to get like X amount of steps a day, just like silly ways for the brain to deal with it. I was doing a little bit of meditation. I was doing just things to like kill the time, but in a routine sort of way, and it worked. I mean, it was kind of weird. I didn't feel, but as soon as I came out, it was almost like it didn't happen because 2 weeks is quite a long time.
Right. It is a long time to be like just literally in a room by yourself. And for all of us who followed along with you, it was fascinating how you made it work, because I do remember, the workouts that you were doing, and you were sharing like books that you were reading, and you got delivered, right? You could pick your meals and It was interesting, but I gave you all the credit because I think at that point, like we had all been in quarantine. I say it, lightly because of what you were going through was actual serious quarantine. But it was fascinating to watch how you got through that. And then, when you finally got out, it was like,
Yeah, it was interesting because I'd just come from Melbourne, and Melbourne had one of the longest and harshest lockdowns in the world. It was like 250 days of the highest lockdown. We were only allowed to leave the house for like an hour a day. It was pretty intense. And then I did the 2 weeks in New Zealand, and then New Zealand had done so well up until that point of avoiding COVID, and then it finally made its way into the system, and then we had like an insane lockdown at this end 2 times. So
Wow.
yeah, but like the whole reason we moved back was to have the family, like my daughter, closer to her grandparents and her cousins and stuff. And so we moved to an area where the family was, and we instantly got the benefits of that. And so that was really the whole initiative behind moving back. Jess and I were always going to move back. We're Kiwis, so it was we were only supposed to be in Melbourne for 5 years, but then it turned into 12, just because opportunities happen. Like we both became business owners in that time. We ended up having our daughter over there. I've got a son as well, and yeah, before you know it, like 5 years turned into 12 years, and we thought, shit, we better get back. So COVID wasn't the reason, but it was definitely a good reason, because my son had actually moved back to New Zealand about a couple of years prior, because his mum and I together. We haven't been together like since he was born, pretty much. Totally get on fine. She's a great mum. It's a totally cohesive thing. But he'd lived with us the majority of the time in Melbourne. He moved back, and then when COVID happened, and the borders were shut, that fluidity between the two countries, which is really easy for New Zealand and Australia. We have like a quite an open treaty relationship. It's quite good. I couldn't see him. He couldn't come over. And so that was the final reason to go, really,
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think like for all, like the reason of moving back was, obviously the family, but I didn't really even have drumming in mind when I first got back. And then all of a sudden things started to present themselves, and I thought, shit, I could probably get back into drumming.
Yes. Yeah. And
let's get back into it.
Let's talk about that too, because when I remember first hearing of you, and I feel like you are one of the first kind of like online presence, drumming presences. Like you had this, right? Like it was pretty early on where you established yourself online as an online drummer.
Yeah, I always say that I was part of that first wave of that international drum community that started to pop off. I can think of a dozen guys that were sort of in a similar position to me. We were all sort of obviously thinking the same thing, putting up different sort of content, but because social media, especially for musicians, was still so not everyone was online yet. The growth was a lot easier, the feedback was a lot more immediate and whatnot. So yeah, I was a part of that initial wave.
Yeah, but before that, like how did you get your start? Like what were you when you first started drumming, how did that come about?
Yeah, so I was like 13 years old. I'd already been playing guitar for a couple of years. I still play guitar now. I just don't share it with anyone. And I was at a friend's house, and his brother had a drum kit, and they had to go out onto the farm to do some work. And I just happened to be chilling out in his brother's room. And I sat down on his brother's drum kit, and I just played the classic Money Beat, and just, got an amazing sense of endorphins. And from that moment onwards, I went to school the next day and basically approached the music teacher and just said, I want to be a drummer. I was playing keyboard in a band at that time as well, and we were doing like a local band competition. We did that competition, and then that was essentially the last time I played keyboard. And then from that moment onwards, I pretty much always identified as a drummer, no matter what I did for work or whatever my life situation was. If someone asked me what I did, I'd always say drummer first, even though it never, it didn't start paying me until my early 20s. Oh, no, maybe my late teens, because I did a couple of covers bands as well. But yeah, it's just funny, like the moment that I connected with it, the identity was set in stone straight off the bat.
That's amazing. And what kind of music were you playing back then in your cover bands?
Yeah, so like with the before the covers bands, my early inspiration was real pocket driven music, but in that sort of like rock and new metal scene. So like my earliest inspiration for that style, one of my earliest inspirations was Brad Wilk from Rage. And it's so like I never really did the grunge thing. Like I never really went down there. I think I was a little bit too young to catch the wave of that, because a lot of my got friends that I became friends with later on who are a few years older than me. They were total grunge heads and they weren't really new metal guys. So I think I was just that prime age for Rage Against the Machine, and then your bands that follow that, like your Deftones, and I mean, you know, I'm a massive John Otto fan, so Limp Bizkit. It's all pretty cliche stuff now, but I look back on it and they were such great influences, because I found out years later, you know, as you start to learn more about your influences and what they're into, they were all hip hop heads. And so they were real pocket driven hip hop guys that found themselves in rock and metal contexts. So they were the perfect guys for me to learn from, because I was obviously into the music. But, you know, like when you're playing along to music, as you do when you're a kid, and you're trying to lock into their pocket, and the drums almost go like you can't even hear their drums anymore because you're so locked in. That was always my goal when I would jam along to tracks and bands and whatnot. So I just sort of I just appreciate so much now, as being a bit older, those fundamental years are just so important, like the influences, because you get such a concentrated version of what that is, and that forever sets you, you know, like you never really get away from that. I still feel like exactly the same drummer as I was in my teens, you know, and I've been playing for 26 years now. So I just feel really fortunate that those guys were so heavily pocket driven, because I feel that that's where I sort of got my pocket from those guys, you know.
That makes a ton of sense. I always say, like, check out who your influences are, right? Like, because it does it how who they were affected by, or the music they were affected by, turned them into the drummer that they are. And so, like, if you kind of dig deep on some of that stuff, you discover really, really great music that you connect with as well. So
it's fascinating. Like, they probably had like big drum influences as well. But if you look at like the 5 or 6 that I was probably the most influenced by in my like more my learning years, you know, it was Brad Wilk, John Otto, Abe Cunningham, Jose from Incubus, who else? Oh, and then a little bit later, like in my sort of like maybe 17, 18, 19 years, was like Danny Carey started to enter the scene, and Steve Smith, guys that sort of, you know, had a little bit more to show, I suppose. But like, that's such a mighty 5 or 6 people to be heavily influenced by, and their influences were hip hop, you know, which is just so cool.
It's amazing. It is amazing. And I think about like the rock drummers, you know, of like, so our generation influenced by those guys, and then the generation, you know, before us influenced by Ringo and Charlie Watts, and, you know, and of course, like, we're all influenced by John Bonham because he's John Bonham. But you know, those guys were like jazz driven, you know, they were listening to jazz music, and so like it all comes back.
It's weird, eh? Another great example is Mitch Mitchell with Jimi Hendrix. Like, he's a jazz drummer in a rock context, and I love finding out. It doesn't ever surprise me when a drummer that I'm really into for their unique sound, it turns out they're not in their genre. You know, they come from a different world, and I always think that's the coolest thing. Like, you look at Chris Penny with Dillinger. You know, like his style of approaching a band like that is so different to any drummer prior or since that come from the metal world. He was a jazz drummer, you know, he did corpse drumming as well and things like that, I think, as far as I know, but he was definitely a jazz guy. And much like Mitch Mitchell, you put them in the context of a rock band and they bring all that over, and man, the flavor is just insane, eh?
It is amazing. And like you mentioned, Danny Carey too, and his you know, his jazz like background, and like all the music that he plays outside of Tool, and you know, it's amazing to see that as well.
I try and always think like that too. Like, I play, I do a bunch of session work and stuff, and I always try and stay out of the norm, just because, you know, flavor is key, I suppose. It's not to tread over what you're doing, but just to add. I always try and think of guys like that who have found themselves in a situation where genre-wise they're out of where they would be naturally, but it just sounds so much better having them involved.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's interesting to like really have a wide take on music in general. And even if you are playing a specific genre 90% of the time, having that kind of like wider knowledge of sound and beats and all of that, it can only lend itself positively, I think, to what you're putting out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, case in point is that when I got to my late teens and I did started working in covers bands and whatnot, I also put together a Tool tribute band. So for like a couple of years there, I think I was 18 when I started it. All the rest of the band were about 5 to 10 years my senior. And the reason why the band started is because a flatmate of mine said that no one could play Tool. Like he was the sort of guy that just like made stupid statements like that. And so me and my other flatmate, we went into our own spaces, and 6 hours later came out and we could both play Eulogy. And so then we played Eulogy together and got an amazing feeling from it, playing a song like that. And then we decided to actually turn it into a band. And then we were gigging as a Tool tribute band for a couple of years there. And I went nuts.
I love that. That's so great.
Yeah, it's funny, like, because I get real focused, like I get real into things, and it was the perfect thing to sort of apply my mind to, because and I suppose it's sort of where I figured out ear training and things like that. Like I don't read, I'm self-taught, so you've really got to, when you listen to music and you're fighting through the frequencies to hear something, or you're looking through the music in your mind to try and figure out what that is. So I spent hours listening to Tool and learning all of Danny's things, and then I spent so I did that for a couple of years, and I ended up playing in a prog band at that time, a band that I still play with now called the New Caledonia. And I suppose I spent the next few years trying to take Danny out of my playing, like not take him out, but yeah, I think because I was, so caught up in sounding like Danny. I even had my kit set up like his when I was like 18 to 20 years old, with the ride up high and things like that, just because we were a Tool tribute band, doing the thing.
Yeah, you have to do it.
Yeah, you got to do it. And then I spent, a few years after that trying to make sure that I hadn't taken on so much that I had just taken Danny's style or sound. A similar thing happened with Carter Beaufort as well, because like I got into Carter around the same time. So like in my late teens, it was all about, my guys were like Carter, Danny, Steve Smith, and Thomas Hark and John Theodore. They were kind of like my 5 guys that really sort of, I know there were elements of each of those guys that I was really focused in on. So like with Carter, it was hi-hat work. With John, it was his ghosting in the Mars Volta. With Thomas Hark, it was his control of like insane polyrhythms, but still really groove focused. Like you could still feel that fundamental pocket that a lot of metal doesn't have, just because it's too treated, And then with Steve Smith, it was purely just the virtuosity. Like the Steve that I was really into was the band that he had with Victor Wooten and I think a guitarist called Scott Henderson called Vital Tectones.
Oh, okay.
They only did 2 albums, and they wrote them in like in the studio over like a 5-day period. And I think they did a couple of shows, but it was a 3-piece fusion thing essentially,
Wow.
And that was the Steve Smith that I was really into at the time as well. So like, I don't know, like I've been really interested in like I did a festival over in Spain recently, and I like to talk about things like the importance of influences and choosing them wisely. And sometimes you've got to choose them strategically, but then also it's a real privilege to be someone's influence. So like, I like framing it like that as well. It's a privilege for the band to be your influence, because you're giving them so much authority on you, like, and so, and I think we kind of just, I don't know, thinking about that more consciously is quite interesting.
Absolutely. You actually posted recently about your influences, just talking about like not drumming or music wise, but just the people that your mentors, right? Or like the people that you surround yourself with. And I relate to that really, really closely. Just, I do think that you're so affected by the people that you hold closest to you, right? Definitely. So like you want to make sure that those people are really positive in your life and really like really good humans, because you kind of like take on characteristics of the people that you are closest to, I think. And
even as an adult, like our brain, like we're just sponges, obviously it's a lot more obvious when you're younger, but like something, so like I said, I'm 38, so I'm really focused on really, I'm just not interested in having negative influences in my life, negative people, even mindsets. I don't want to be, but then at the same token, I don't want to be the only person in my circle that's sort of thinking the way that I choose to think. So making sure that I surround myself with people that raise the bar real high for myself as well. what do they say? You're a product of the 5 people you hang out with the most. And so, or
Yes.
even that you let into your world the most. It used to be to hang out with the most, but because we can
Right.
live our life online, you can pretty much choose who you want to be influenced by,
Yes, it's so true. You're a product of the 5 people that you Zoom call or you FaceTime the most, right?
Exactly. And so the way that I was thinking of it is because I've got a playlist on Spotify that I built that's to keep it real basic, it's essentially guys, early pioneers of personal development. So I'm talking about, there's a lot of the stuff that I read, for example, a lot of the books are written in like anywhere from 1905 to 1932. So like the real early written form of personal development. And I'm calling it personal development because that's the way that it's been framed, but it almost has a negative connotation now. But that's the world that it comes from, but then the audio side of it, that post that I did was in relation to the playlist that I've created of the 5 guys that I choose to have in my head on a daily basis to kind of set me up mentally, I suppose. Yes. And like, for example, one of them is Tony Robbins' mentor. So he's the guy that Tony was influenced by.
Got you.
So the guys that sort of the early pioneers, one of the guys, his name's Earl Nightingale, and he was a radio broadcaster from the 1950s, and he actually created the first audiobook ever.
Wow.
So he was basically he was a radio broadcaster, but he was really into personal development and sort of like mind, just growth. Like personal growth is a really good way to put it. And he basically wrote out this thing which he called The Stranger's Secret. And essentially it's like if you read it, it's a short book, but in spoken word, it's only about 22 minutes long. And it's like, to summarize it real quickly, all he's saying is that you become what you think about. So choose your thoughts really carefully. And it's 22 minutes of him talking about that. And it's super powerful stuff. And anyway, he cut it to a vinyl in the late 1950s from memory. And that was the first audio format book that had ever been created, and people were buying this and putting it in like portable vinyl players and things like that, putting them in their car and whatnot. And so like he's one of the guys, for example, as well, that's on that playlist. And I don't know, like sometimes I do these posts because they just are like a moment of inspiration where I feel like sharing that stuff. Yes. And then 2 weeks later I'll be like, I don't really want to have that up there anymore.
I know the feeling. I do the same thing where I think it's important to share positivity. I don't know. There's so much negativity out there. There's so much like just you can easily surround yourself with nonsense. I don't know.
Definitely. It's easier now than ever.
It's so easy. You could spend hours just looking at like things that don't really matter. And I feel like personally, I'd rather share something that might help someone else or something that I'm feeling at the time. So I do the same thing. Sometimes I'll post something about like being positive or how I'm feeling or something like that. And then I'm just like, oh,
I know. Yeah. It's like my position, like I suppose going back to when we talked about when you sort of found out about me through the social media thing, the way that I position myself online now is a much more true representation of how I feel. And I think that that's probably something that's really not shared as often as what it should be. Like, so my thing with social media now is to be as honest as I possibly can, which is why I do show people stories of me reading a book or, getting up early and then maybe I did a workout or maybe I'm doing a session. I don't know. Like I don't want to ever paint a picture that's not there. And then also for me, it's beyond the drumming, like, because one of the issues that I had started to have with social media is I started to get identified as a social media drummer or an Instagram drummer, which was the term that I was seeing quite a lot. And I think because I'm a little bit older than some of the drummers that are online, that really rubbed me the wrong way because I'd already had sort of played with 2 major label artists prior, and I'd done a bunch of touring and stuff.
Look at all these things that I've done.
Yeah, and I'd been relegated to being an Instagram drummer, and so like I burnt the bridge completely and deleted all my content, and just kind of like threw the system under the bus, and then I just sort of decided to rebuild a more truer representation of how I am on a daily basis and how I want to be perceived online, which is essentially just a person as a professional drummer, just trying to do my thing, you know, and also sharing my frame of mind along the way, which I think is really important too. Because, you know, like I suppose when you put up things like waking up at 3 a.m. and then reading a book and then doing a net workout and then playing your drums for 2 hours, all before 7 in the morning, people start asking questions like, how do you do that, man? What are you doing? And all those sorts of things. And so that's why I share a bit more of the things like that positivity post about choose your influences carefully, because these guys that I listen to, or these audio things, they really shape my frame of mind on a daily basis, and they help reinforce the way that I want to be on a daily basis, and then also the way I want to come across to the world too, you know?
Absolutely. I agree with you. And I like resist the urge to take things down like that, because at the end of the day, there are all these people that write and say thank you for sharing, or thank you for your positive attitude, or thank you for making me feel better about today, or something like that. And it's like, you know what, if one person gets that message, I think it's important. And it sounds easy, but it's not. It's real. That's who I am. That's who you are. I think it's important to share that.
Yeah, I think so too. And like one of the questions I get more than anything now is more about the style of question that I get in my DMs is really just about how to set up a good routine, like a good quality, like daily structure and schedule. And people just want to know how do you get up early? And it's real basic stuff. Those are the things that people lean into now. And I think that's probably because I don't share, because, you know, like, you know, when I started popping off on Instagram and Facebook, it was because of the single kick stuff and the chop stuff, right? And that was what I sort of relegated my playing to on that platform as a form of expression. But that's what caused the problem in a lot of ways. And so back then, and even for a long time, post my Drumeo appearance and stuff, it was all about how do you do the single kick stuff? How do you do your chops and things like that? Which is all, those are fair enough questions and great questions. But I think I really enjoy the process of the mindset stuff. When I always relate it to drumming, like if I do clinics and whatnot, that's the stuff that I like to tap into. I like to talk about how to set up more of a stronger frame of mind, you know, how to stay, you know, consistent with your commitment to your craft, you know, how to present yourself online as well, which a lot of kids need to sort of really start thinking about, and things like that, things that I feel shows a broader sense of the way that I think about drumming and music in general, you know, and just lifestyle, I suppose.
Yes. And one of the things I noticed too, and you were talking about, you know, people writing and asking for advice, is that you post openly, you know, write to me, ask me questions, I will answer them. I love that so much. I think that's incredibly important that you are, you know, and it's, you're not charging for that. You're saying like, write to me and I'll answer your questions. I'll help you with whatever you need. And that is amazing. I just have to say.
Oh, cool. Cheers. Well, there's two reasons why I don't charge for it. One, because I'm not qualified, so I shouldn't charge for it in terms of like advice. So I'm not a healthcare professional or anything like that. So it all has to be taken, you know, like very lightly. But then also, it's not drum related, so I don't feel like I'm giving away any IP, which I definitely do feel that you should charge for knowledge on the kit, like intellectual property and whatnot. And I've actually gone through this myself through social media and seen a lot of guys online, the way that they do it, to come back to the place where I'm like, no, we need to value this. We need to value, whether it's me, I've been playing for 26 years and my niche style of playing, I do have 26 years experience in what I do. So I should not just put up a post that basically just debate more likes and clicks and stuff at the expense of not valuing what the core idea is or concept is, you know? So I'm really, I'm happy to give people free advice because I'm not qualified and it's not a drum lesson.
Right. But it is valuable, and it's amazing that, you know, you're willing to share, because it's your experience that you're sharing.
Definitely.
And that's fantastic. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, I suppose it's still very specific to me too, because I've realized that not everyone is wired the same as well. And I've always been this way inclined. So I can offer advice and stuff, but it still comes down to the individual, you know, taking that ownership and making those changes, I suppose.
And let me just ask, so are you waking up at 3 o'clock every morning? Is that the part of the routine?
Yeah.
Is it 3 o'clock? Okay. Because
Yeah.
I'm just thinking like that's very, very early in the morning.
Yeah, it is. I just like to get a lot done before my family wake up because I don't want my
Mhm.
personal things to interfere with my wife and my daughter's time. And once the day's up and running, you know, I don't like sitting down on my kit and practicing when I know my family's downstairs or if I'm in the studio and whatnot. I do
Mhm.
it, but I try and do the bulk of my stuff, my reading time, my exercise, and my kit time, my practice time in my time. And
Yeah,
so, and I think too, because this wouldn't work for everyone. Because I've been a business owner outside of drumming for the last 15 years, I've had the luxury of with my the reason why I'm telling you this is because I've thought about it a lot, why it works for me and maybe not for a lot of other people. And
sure.
the reason is because being a business owner for so many years and what you could call supplementing through other means of drumming, even though they were the primary means for many years, it gave me the luxury of really only taking on gigs and sessions and festivals and clinics or whatever stuff that I'm truly into. So I haven't
Mhm.
really had to worry too much about taking everything that comes my way drumming wise, which would then in turn take away a lot of my creativity juices and time. You know, like if I was playing the kit 5 nights a week in a covers band and then playing with an artist in the weekend or whatever, I probably wouldn't be practicing anywhere near as much because I wouldn't want to. So I've thought
Right.
about this a lot, and I feel very fortunate that my life's gone the way it has because I still sit down on the kit for over 2 hours every day and absolutely love it every time I do.
That's amazing. You've found a way to keep it fun, right? So it's
Yeah,
not
and unintentionally as well. And so
Mhm.
when I do like clinics and festivals or lessons, this is a big part of it that I talk about. I had this drummer when I was in Melbourne. He flew over from oh man, where was it? It might have been Korea, or this is years ago now. Like this is sort of really at the peak of the Instagram thing. He
Mhm.
flew over from somewhere in Asia. I can't remember. Awesome guy. He asked if he could have a lesson, and I said, "Yeah, man, absolutely." And he came over. Turns out he came over for the lesson. This came out through the conversation. I'd only booked him in for an hour, and he had sold his electronic drum kit to come over for the lesson.
Oh my
And so I ended
goodness.
up giving him, yeah, I know. So like when this came out in the first 5 minutes, because it was at my coffee roastery, I went over and I said, "Let's have a coffee," and I made him a coffee just so we could sort of, figure out where he was at mentally, and then on the kit and whatnot. And this came out in the first 5 minutes, and I was like, "Oh man, well, I can't give you an hour. Let's do like 3 or 4 hours." And so I
Wow.
really gave him a lot of time. And one thing that he was struggling with was that he played in. Let me get this right. He had like 30 students, and he played in 2 covers bands, and that took a lot of time out of him, like 30 students a week, and then 2 corporate sort of covers bands. He didn't have any juice for his originals band and did not feel like practicing. And my
Mhm.
response to that was like, cut your students in half and get rid of at least one of the corporate bands, if not both, and supplement your income else. Like do something else. I said, man, it doesn't matter if it's stacking shelves. It doesn't matter if it's anything outside of drumming, just to sort of get out of giving all your time to it. And he
Yeah.
was like, really? He was really confused by it. And I was like, I'm serious, man. Like I've always thought about it, that you've got X amount of creativity in a big pool in you that you can offer a week. And if
Mhm.
you're and it's only one pool. You don't have like a working drummer pool and then a creative, original, expressing yourself pool. It's all one pool because it's
Right.
just playing with your kit. And so like I only really tap into it partially professionally, and then the rest of it's for when I'm practicing. And I just learned over the years that when I was in things like covers bands and whatnot, it was the most uncreative time I've ever had on the kit. So I ended up quitting bands for those reasons because I felt like they were just sucking me dry. For to use Maynard as a
Yeah, there we go.
there you go, yeah. And then yeah, like I told him to do this, and he went back, and then a few months later he messaged me, and his whole life had turned around. He did do that. He cut his students down to like 10 students a week. I think he actually got like a temporary teaching job, so like helping outside of music, like just teaching in general. And he
Wow.
cut his corporate band. He got rid of one of the bands, and his creativity had shot through the roof. And his original band was going really well. And not only that, but because he asked for some exercise advice while he was there too, and I had my little workout station there, so I showed him how to use a rower and like gave him like a workout plan essentially. And he'd gone back and bought a rower. He was healthier than he'd ever been. He'd got engaged, like all this really good
Wow.
shit. And it's anecdotal, but I think that the point is that he wasn't burnt out. every time he sat down on the drums, you know. And I deal with guys, you know, good friends of mine on a daily basis who are quite burnt out because they just give too much of their time to work that isn't creative on the kit. And so I feel fortunate that without even like the only reason that I worked in a different industry in hospitality was because I had kids young and I didn't want to be touring, and it was just a great way to have a more stable lifestyle, you know, with the responsibilities that I had. I just realized in recent times that it's the reason why I've still been able to keep progressing on the kit and still have an absolute desire to play all the time. Like my wife is like, she's sick of it, you know, like her and my daughter have this thing where like, if I start talking about drumming, they go drums, 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 because it just doesn't stop, you know?
Yeah, I know it doesn't. And there's something about drumming that, you know, you don't become not a drummer when you step away from your kit, right? You're always a drummer. You're a drummer constantly. We drum on everything. We talk about drums all the time. We talk about drummers all the time. We listen to music and we're, you know, the air drum along with it. We, you know, we're like, you know, we drive our families crazy by saying, oh, wait, this is my favorite part that's coming up. And this is why, you know, like it's just.
There's that great meme. There's that great meme of the couple lying in bed and the wife's thinking to herself, oh man, what's going on with him? He's just things are just not good at the moment. It must have been this that I'd done or something like that. And then it goes to him and he's like, man, I just cannot get that 12-inch tom to sound right. And that's essentially like, well, that's how I feel in a nutshell, you know. Like at the moment I'm having an issue with my 16-inch, you know, and I'm just like, it's on my mind 24/7, you know.
It'll drive you crazy until you fix it. Yeah. Or should I buy this piece of equipment? Or you know, like it's just
and even like I just rejigged my whole room. It took me a couple of days and I just loved it. And that like thinking about that leading up to doing it was quite an ordeal for me emotionally, you know, like
And like the other thing is when drummers get together, the gear talk, the music talk, it's nonstop. And I don't think singers don't get together and talk about their mics like that. The guitar players don't get together and talk about like, oh, remember this, you know, lick that so-and-so did. It doesn't happen. It's like this thing with drummers, and you know, and you could talk all day long about it.
Yeah, and the perfect example of that, the perfect like proof of that is that drummers have festivals about drumming. Like we do 2-day festivals where we will go watch someone on a drum kit. Like guitarists don't have that. They have bass player day and stuff, but they usually need the drummer with them. Like we, you know, I've thought about this too because it came up while I was in Spain with my Yamaha guys. They were talking about it too. He's like, man, drums are just so strange that we congregate. And then we like go ooh and ah, and like they wheeled my drum kit out the back so everyone could come and have a look at it and stuff. And like, you know, it's so funny. And I think it's because it's such an imposing instrument. It's got so many different components and it requires every limb as well. There's just something so physical and present based about it, so much more than a guitar, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm heading to PASIC in a couple of weeks, and
cool.
I can't wait. Like, it's not just the fact that like all these great players will be performing clinics, like that's a huge part of it, but it's also like the gear part, you know, the exhibit halls filled with all this new gear. I want to see it. I want to hear it. I want to be with my drumming family. Like we're all
you've got a big community and a big network too, eh? Your reach is like crazy, man.
Oh, thank you. I love the fact that like it's like a family reunion when we all get together. And I know you feel it too. Like you were just in Spain, right? At the I know I'm going to say the name wrong. You have to pronounce the name for me. The drum
Alteza? I say Alteza.
Alteza, okay. But it is like you go to those festivals and you're around like Carter McLean was.
Yeah, Carter was there, and so was Richie Martinez, and it's like funny. I've spoken to both of them briefly online, just through social media and stuff over the years, and like for one, like they were just so different to how I even perceived them online. Not that I perceived them in a negative way, but when you're meeting, but we instantly connected, like both parties, and like Carter's a AGOP artist or a GOP artist as well, and he and I got on really well, and it's that thing. It's like, you know, they knew a bit of me, I knew a bit of them, and we were just instantly like good friends, and it was really cool, you know.
It is. It's amazing. It's this connection that makes you feel like you know each other. And, you know, like it's funny because we were talking at the start of this how, you know, we've never talked before. Like we've emailed each
No.
other. We've been connected on social media forever. But like
Yeah.
but having a conversation, I feel like I've known you forever. And
Yeah, it's weird. Like I know that you like running, or you like, you know, and you've got your
yeah,
family, and you know, like I know things, I know enough, I know about you, you know. But yeah, like you say, we've never spoken,
but like
but it
we would,
doesn't feel like that.
right? Like we would get together and go have an industry dinner and just talk and talk and talk because
Yeah.
that's what this industry is. And I
I
feel
suppose that's the benefit of social media too, is that it bridges the
Mhm.
gap of like interactions, like first time interactions or whatever, so well. Like I've done festivals in Australia and different clinics here and there, and like you know, like Benny's been there, and Dom and Eric Moore's been there, and been out to dinner with them and stuff, and not
Mhm.
feeling that like because you've kind of like followed them along so much more than what we could have in the past, that it's not as daunting anymore, you know.
Yes. Yeah, that is so true. And it does, it breaks the ice because you know enough to have a conversation with someone at the very
Yeah,
least, right? You're like,
yeah,
"Oh, Eric
definitely.
Moore. Okay, I can talk to him about his you know, drum
His
house,
chop.
like fantasy camp that he has, right?" And
Yeah, yeah.
you know, things like that. It is amazing. That is
Mm.
definitely a positive for social media.
Yeah, yeah. I think the one
Yeah.
thing that I just that I want to be, or that I just make sure that I am going forward, is just to be as real as possible. And also, like, one thing that I did with the content is I didn't have it pigeonholed into like a brand almost. You know,
Mhm.
like I moved it away from being the brick wall. Every post that I did was essentially just looking at the kit from the same angle with the same backdrop, and that almost became a brand.
Mhm.
And now I'm quite happy to put up random stuff that gets no traction at all. To be honest, actually, like to be completely honest, since I changed my format of not just putting up vids of like single kick and chops every day, my numbers are going down, because it's like that's what the audience came in with, and that's what I basically took away from them. But it's weird because my fulfillment on there is so much better than what it ever was prior. I just
Mhm.
feel, because it's more of a truer representation, where, you know, like on Tuesday night I was doing an arena gig. On the weekend just prior, I was in Australia
Mhm.
for a gig in Sydney, and then you know, a week before that I was in Spain. And I'm just putting up, like, maybe it's just the poster from the gig, or just random bits of information that no one gives a shit about, but but I don't know, like it shows a wider scope of things, you know. And because I'm a professional drummer, and that's the way that I want the community, wider than the drum community, to know of me.
Mhm.
They can go on my social media now and see that I do sessions for random artists. I have my own bands. I can play in multiple genres. I can do a studio session, no worries. They can see I can hold my own in a drum clinic and present information. Like, they can see a wider scope than just putting up some chops like I
Yeah,
used to, and get
absolutely.
relegated to the Instagram drummer thing, you know?
Mhm, mhm,
Yeah,
and I think I think it's more important to be authentic than to stick with a brand that isn't who you are, right?
definitely.
Like, and so I appreciate all the things you post, and I
Oh,
know
cool.
that, like, yeah, and if it hits someone the right way, I think that's important. One of the things that you posted, really was like I was just like, "Yes, yes, Stan," and it was it was the harder you work, the luckier you get.
Oh, yeah, I love that quote.
Oh goodness, it just hit home with me, and I'm like, because people will say, "Oh, you're so lucky to be in this industry and you're lucky to, you know, do what you do or whatever," and I'm sure you get that too, and a lot of people get that, and I'm always thinking like, "Man, I it's really like it's been a labor of love for like 20 years." That's that's why,
Absolutely.
you know,
That
so
quote is from a guy called Brian Tracy, who is a part of that sort of those five guys that I mentioned. And it's such a great example of where people get the wrong end of the stick, you know, like luck is just a byproduct of the effort put in.
Mhm.
And so one thing that I realized in the recent years, especially, is that the harder you do work, if you just focus on your craft and dialing yourself in whatever aspect, things will just present themselves, because the byproduct is that you're ready. I'm a firm believer in get ready for the things you don't know you're going to get an opportunity for. Like, don't just stay at the level that your current situation could get you to do. It's like, I'm always working towards the gig and the environments and things that I don't know that are going to come around the corner. And that way I'm ready for them, and that always happens where like something will pop up and I've just been working on that thing for 3 months prior, and like I happen to be ready for it,
Yes, I do know. Actually, a situation came up for me recently, just like that, where I had a plan, and this is what I'm going to make happen. And in looking back, it's like, wow, it did happen. And it was because I made the decision to focus energy in that direction, so
yeah. I'm a big believer in that,
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, another great quote too that I really like is, how The Rock always says, "Be the hardest worker in the room." It's a real cliche almost.
Yes.
That's obviously a great quote, but one of the guys that I listen to, this is actually Tony Robbins' Tony Robbins' mentor. His name's Jim Rohn. He says, work, be the hardest worker in the room, but work even harder on yourself. And that's a really powerful statement, like working harder on yourself, and whether that's, like commitment to physical things you do every day, whether that's, like doing a bit of exercise, or maybe it's like gaining knowledge in a different field, or even your field that you're currently in. Work harder on yourself than what you do towards your profession. And the byproduct is that you're just like that. You're just so much more open to receiving more and more opportunity, and you're ready for it as well.
I'm
a big believer in that.
I am gonna clap for that, because it's so good. And I did not learn that lesson until about 2 years ago. I did not.
I'm probably about the same, to be honest.
Yeah, I did not.
Like no, but you are into exercise and stuff, though, right?
Yes, 100%.
Yeah. So like maybe you were doing some of it subconsciously, similar to me, where it's like you were just doing the thing, but connecting the dots is an important part of it. And I too like connected the dots a couple of years ago, where I started to realize, actually, I'm consciously going to start working on myself more than what I do on my craft. And so that's why I commit to reading every day. It's why I commit to doing exercise in some shape or form every day. These little things, and that's that step towards personal growth. And then the byproduct is that when you do make the time for your craft or your instrument or whatever, the output is so much higher. And then the rewards are, especially because of the benefit of social media, that the world gets a glimpse into what you're up to, and then the opportunities will present themselves. And that's another thing too. I'm never worried about opportunity anymore, because I'm always working towards it. That it'll always present itself in some capacity.
Right. And that's so interesting. I mean, I always had this thought, like, well, what if the worst happens? What if, and to me, the worst thing that I could imagine was not working for Zildjian Cymbals. Like that was the worst thing I could ever think of in my life. I wasn't thinking like I could lose my health or something could happen to I was literally like so focused on my job and what I was doing for a company that was the worst thing that could happen. And the worst thing happened. We get into a pandemic and the worst thing happened. And then I realized the most important lesson of my life, it wasn't the worst thing that could happen, right? Like, and that was the biggest change.
Must have been a big one, though. Yeah, it must have been massive. I don't know if you've talked about it much. Have you gone into it much on your podcast? Or like, I don't even know your personal stance on talking about it.
No, here and I've kind of covered it here and there, not a ton. But I mean, the real big thing is, I realized just how much energy and effort that I was putting toward, a brand that wasn't mine. Yeah. Right. And so at the end of the day, I thought to myself, what if I love The Rock. I love that quote, be the hardest worker in the room. I have always felt like that. And I've always worked so hard at whatever it was that I was focused on. And I thought to myself, what if I had focused that energy on something that was mine?
Yeah, on me.
Right. Myself or my company or my podcast or right. So it was like this total mindset change, and it was amazing. And I probably haven't never been healthier, physically.
Cool.
And I just really, I do get up early. I do get things done before anything else starts, before people are awake, before the companies that I consult with are awake. And
Cool.
and it feels like I've started my day on myself, which is really incredibly important. And I just didn't put that energy there before.
But yeah, you were saying that the opportunities they do present themselves, and like you can these conversations can fall into the esoteric a little bit. So like I'm always careful about how I handle them because I don't want to diminish the power of what we're saying. But I do think that, because for one, I am the hardest worker in my room, because I just have seen the results of that, right? So no one will sort of match my schedule that I see in my immediate world, and if they do, then I'll probably level it up. I'll probably do something else crazy, I said to my wife a little while back, I was like, you know what? 2:30 a.m. is not seeming like that crazy now. And she's just like, what the hell, man? Do not do that. Because, like people, the first question I always get to is like, if you're getting up at 3, what time are you going to bed? And to be honest, like if I'm in bed by 8:30 and I read and I'm down by 9, that's still 6 hours. And I had my son when I was 19 years old, and because he and his mum and I separated early on, mutually, like it was totally fine, but I would have him in my room when he was really young in a portico, and from then on I was such a light sleeper, like that just having him in my room half of the week in a portico, I would hear a pin drop, and so from that point onwards my sleeping has always been like I just have not, I do get 6 hours a night. I always make sure I get my 6, but I just don't need any more than that. I can function completely fine without it. And so, like, I don't know, like it's that idea of optimizing my time. Like everyone gets the same amount of time in the day. The highest performers have the same amount of time as the lowest performers. No one's got more or any less. It's exactly the same,
Right.
And so just being aware of that and just trying to absolutely squeeze the most out of it and the way that I want to live my life,
Yes. I also get about 6.5 hours of sleep a night, and I do go. Like I definitely don't really stop, but I like it like that. Like I like, I like the movement. I like constantly going. I like the feeling of at the end of the day that you did what you set out to do.
Definitely.
Sitting is not my thing. Like it just.
Oh, well, that's the thing. Like in the evening, like late afternoon, early evenings, I will start to peter out because obviously when you're getting up at 3, you've moved the window back.
Tired.
But I really enjoy that time too. Like when I'm just starting to sort of get a little bit doughy, Yeah, it's quite funny. I do enjoy that. But also like just the byproduct of that sort of output, you just got to trust the process as well. I just trust the process of the things that I commit to, and do not expect anything I don't have any expectation from the world. I just trust the fact that if I put energy into these 3 or 4 things, that the rest will figure itself out,
Absolutely. Yeah. And speaking about putting energy into things, and also speaking of playing different genres of music, I just want to hear what you're up to with your bands. I know the New Caledonia, I've heard you post a bit about music with that band, and I'm a big fan, being a prog rock fan, of course. I love the music. But tell me about what you're up to and with the other.
Yeah, cool. So I'll give you a rundown of sort of where I'm at across the board, really. So, we're in my drum studio right now, which is really cool. And it's got, it's fully mic'd up and it's always ready to go. I'm sort of fortunate. I've got, multiple setups. And so I have the luxury of, tracking for people and not having to really mess with my kit, which is such a privilege. After 26 years, I finally have a kit that's my Yamaha that's permanently set up at all times, mic'd up, ready to go. I've got amazing SE mics on it, and I run through Apogee hardware, and so I can track raw stems for people, no worries at all. So I just finished an album for someone. I've done a couple of individual song projects for people recently as well. But this room is also I can come in here in 3 a.m. and no one can hear me or anything as well. So It's also the place that I get a lot of my kit time work done, whether it's preparing for a session or whether it's just me working on my stuff, and so this is like a real zone for me. It's got a real feng shui about it. I feel very relaxed in here. It's like meticulously clean. All the cables are hidden. Like it's very much an extension of my personality, this room. I was sharing it with a friend of mine recently, and it was hard it was hard, not anything that he did wrong. It was just purely because my zone, my space. Yeah, that's right. So I track for people in here. I do a lot of pre-production stuff for myself. And then I play. So in Australia, I just did a session with a band that I've actually played on and off with for 14 years now, since like 2008 or 2009. They're like a dance band that use a live band. And when they do their live sets, it's an hour long and every song just bleeds into the next. And so you're doing multiple tracks, like maybe 10 or 11, 12 songs, but it doesn't stop. And so it's always fun playing with them because I don't write anything down. So like I always put everything, I always commit what I do to memory. So it's always cool like working on their material and whatnot, because it's quite a mentally, it's quite a long, file to remember. And then I play with a local artist here called Georgia Lines, and she's in a really cool part of her career where she's got 2 EPs out. She's got half a dozen videos. She's just been selected. She's a nominee for 2 New Zealand Music Awards. So like she's at a really cool turning point for her career, and I just happened to start playing with her maybe 4 or 5 months ago, and that's a really cool gig because of for one, I'm really into the music. So like I only really do sessions that I enjoy, whether it's in here or whether it's live. Like I won't really take on anything that I'm not either connected to musically or connected to the people with. So her stuff's produced really well. The songwriting's ultra tight and her singing is amazing. So she's great to play for because it's a really good pop discipline for me. Similar to, I used to play with an artist called Kimbra back in the day. And she has her earlier stuff especially was a real similar style where it's like a really well produced singer-songwriter stuff, but in a real pop structure. And so, like essentially I'm fundamentally a rock prog guy, right? Like that's the way that I position myself, and a bit of a mongrel too, because I'm self-taught. Like I wouldn't say I've got much finesse, but I like to do these like random little session gigs too, because they're so good for my playing. Like I have to stay disciplined. I have to stay well-rounded. I have to dynamically sit within context of the music. And so she's really the only artist that I've committed to outside of either one-offs or my personal projects. So she was the one that I did the arena gig with on Tuesday night. We opened up for a UK artist called George Ezra, and that was really cool. And she's got a few more things. I'm actually going to be in LA next month with her for a couple of days, which is going to be cool. And yeah, then what else have I got on? So I've got an original band called the New Caledonia, and we've got an album out and a few spot songs here and there. And I've done some live playthroughs on my YouTube channel. I performed one of them on Drumeo, and I even performed 2 of the songs at my clinic in Spain. And it's great to use that. Yeah, the reason why I use that material even to this day is because the way that I do my clinics and festival performances is I tell a bit of a narrative chronologically. So I played 7 songs in Spain that in chronological order that are really good genre hopping and showing like a good range of what I've done, I suppose. And then in between every song, I get up off the kit with the mic and I talk about how I approached the shift into this act from that act. Like I went from a prog band into a pop rock band, and how I had to sort of, this is back in my like early 20s, and how I had to kind of like consider that I wasn't one of 4 people anymore. Got in the prog band, that's what you are, you're 4 individuals fighting or whatever. Whereas in the pop rock context, where we're just one sound, and how everything had to sound like one entity. And backing tracks came into my life at that point, and it was a major label band too. So there's always like something cool to talk about. And then I went from that band into Kimbra. Then I went from Kimbra into the Drumeo stuff, like the single kick stuff, and what happened around that time. And I don't know, like I like to sort of present the New Caledonia stuff at the start of the career, because that's where I started, it's such a like throw everything in band. Like we were like in our early 20s or late teens, early 20s, and everything was in it, man. It's a total prog fest, it was instrumental as well. It was so over the top. but I love that band. I still love playing with them now. So we're getting back together officially to do some shows early next year, which I can't say the reason why we're doing the shows because it hasn't been announced yet, but we've been approached by something that's happening next year, and they've asked if we can bring the band back together essentially, which is cool. And we're all good friends still. So we were all best men at each other's weddings, and we've all had kids that have like grown up together. So we all know each other really well. One of the guys is in Australia. One of the guys is a producer up in Auckland, which is a couple of hours away from me. And one of the guys lives in a neighboring city. And like the band is just sort of fun for us these days, but it's nice that we've got another reason to sort of get the band back together, which is fun.
Yeah.
And I have an original project with a guy here in New Zealand called Black Comet, which is his vision, but we're a 5-piece band that essentially have come together to create his vision for him. And he's sort of one of New Zealand's premier musicians. He's been in the scene for a long time, and he's got a massive reputation nationally. He's a hell of a guy. He's become like a really close friend of mine. And that band we've done a couple of shows, and we've released a couple of live performances that we recorded that I actually engineered. And man, that band's popping off. Like we've had a lot of really big opportunities present themselves. So I'm just very mindful of that. Those are pretty much the main things, apart from if someone messages me and says, can you do this one thing for me?
Sure. Yeah.
I don't want to not be able to say yes to things of those 3 things,
Absolutely. And that's a lot. Like all those things that you just talked about, that's a lot. And I did check out Black Comet Band and definitely understand why it's popping off. So anyone listening should for sure check it out.
But yeah, I appreciate that. Black Comet is a real fun project, and there's some big stuff that we're doing next year. And so yeah, the one thing that I have pulled back from is teaching, I suppose, is that's the one thing that had to take a hit. Unfortunately, I was teaching quite a lot, but once again, it's that energy pull thing, and it's also just if I'm not in the lesson mentally, if I'm thinking about other stuff for what I charge, I have to cut it because it's not fair on the student,
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was going to ask you about that too, because I wasn't seeing a whole lot of that. That's understandable. You're at a different focus in your life.
Yeah, I was teaching so much when I got back here. I had a bunch of students at a local music school, and then I had a lot of private tuition, and then I was also the itinerant tutor for a neighboring city's polytech, so like a school in a neighboring city, and I taught their students all online. And I've basically whittled it down to no one at this point because I just over time I just had to,
Yeah. You need to do what's calling you right now, which is a lot and really great. And I cannot end this interview without asking you when we are going to see you play guitar.
Probably never, because it's like the type of guitar that I'm influenced by is nowhere near the way that I play as a drummer. Like I'm into Jeff Buckley. I'm into like acousticy ballady stuff. Like I'm an acoustic player. So like I get on an electric guitar and I have no idea. It just feels like a different instrument to me. So
yes.
Yeah.
Acoustics of James Taylor or something like that. Like, dude,
yeah. Like definitely that style. I'm a chord guy and I like interesting chords. And for me, I play the guitar because it does something for me that drums don't do, which is melody. And my biggest connections to music are through melody. So I physically relate to rhythm, but emotionally, I really connect with melody. So that's why I keep playing guitar.
I love that. Well, maybe we'll get a sneak peek someday.
Maybe one day in my late 50s or something.
Oh my gosh. Well, I will put a bunch of links and everything in the YouTube description and in the podcast show notes because we want to, follow along with all these great things that you have going on. I can't wait to hear why the New Caledonia is going to be putting out some music, and we'll see why you're going to get back together and all of that. But but in the meantime, enjoy all these great things you're doing, and I will keep enjoying your posts, and I know a lot of other people do. So keep doing that. Don't take them down. Stay authentic because it's the best way
thanks,
to
I
be.
appreciate that. I appreciate I appreciate finally catching up with you and taking the time to have a chat and inviting me on. It's really cool.
Absolutely. Thank you so much and for coming on today. I really, really appreciate your time, and I hope we do get to meet in person at some point.
Yeah, where are you? Where are you in the States?
I'm in Boston, East Coast
Oh,
of the
okay,
US.
cool.
So yes.
Yeah.
But
There's a high chance I'll be over those ways at some point, so I'll keep in touch.
Please do. Please do. It'd be great to see you in person. We'll have that dinner and we'll just talk drums.
Awesome.
All
Thanks,
right.
Sarah.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in today. Join us each Tuesday for new episodes of Sarah Hagan Backstage.